Hello, friends, and welcome to Unseen But Believed, the podcast, where we talk about all things invisible illness. I'm your host, Anna Constantopoulos, and I've been chronically ill for over 8 years. Now, today's episode is very exciting because we have our first guest on the podcast. Her name is Mallory Fehl, and she is a graduate of Milligan University with a major in church leadership, and she is currently pursuing her master's in divinity at Lipscomb University. She was diagnosed with hypermobility several years ago, but now she is currently in the process of getting diagnosed with EDS. She is also one of my dearest friends and overall just a wonderful human being, so stay tuned to learn more about the process of getting diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. Hello, Mallory. Thank you so much for joining us on the Unseen But Believed podcast. How are you doing today?
I am so good, Anna. Good to see you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Of course, you're our first official guest on the podcast. So today we're going to be talking about EDS. And as I understand it, you're kind of in the process of getting diagnosed with EDS, right?
Yep, that's correct.
So how did you first realize that you might have an invisible illness of some sort?
It was actually you. You are the orchestrator of all of this.
What? I had no idea.
Yeah, I didn't know if you knew that. It was probably, I think, when we talked back at YIM back in 2015, and you were going through all the heart issues and then all the stuff also with EDS. And when you were just kind of sharing about some of the experiences and things that were happening to your body, I think that was the first time that I took note. It was like, some of the things she's mentioning sound very similar to some of the things that I have dealt with. And then, we reconnected when you came back to Milligan as a student, and I was there. And again, you just sharing more and more, I was like, yep, I think this is definitely something that I have. And kind of in between that time of 2015 and I guess what would have been 2019, 2020, I had started doing research just personally of trying to figure out, okay, is this even a possibility? Because growing up, everyone just said that I was hypermobile. Any doctors that I saw for anything were just like, oh yeah, you have really loose joints. And that was pretty much where the conversation started and ended. No doctor ever asked like, oh, are you having any of these other issues? It was just focused on, you have loose joints, you're just hypermobile. That's it. Maybe you can do like physical therapy and maybe that can help strengthen the joints. But it wasn't until I started doing more of my own research, hearing about you and your story, that I was like, I think that there's more to this.
That's really wild. I had no clue. I thought I just came to Milligan. You're like, I have EDS too, I think. And I was like, okay, cool. Somebody else.
You had started the train back in 2015.
So you said you're having some hypermobility, right?
Mm-hmm.
Were you having any other symptoms with that?
Yeah. So as a kid, I first noticed it as a child. So I started dislocating things pretty often. Usually it was just my knees. And with that came a lot of chronic pain. I can remember waking up at night and going into my parents' room being like, I was woken up because my knees were hurting so bad and my shoulders were hurting. And my parents it's just growing pains. You're just growing. Here's my
the famous phrase, it's just growing pains.
And here's my ibuprofen, go to bed. And it wasn't until I was older and these things kept occurring. And I was like, wait a second, I'm not growing. I was like, we stopped at 4'11", 5 feet, and this pain is still happening. So how can this be growing pains? I still get a lot of migraines and headaches that can cause visual things, auditory things, a lot of IBS symptoms. And I never thought that all of those could be related. I think for me, my biggest issue was just always hypermobility and dislocating things. And part of that for me was just because I was and am super active, and I can be very reckless with my body. And, playing a lot of sports, doing a lot of physical activity, I just always thought, my main issue is joint dislocations. And so my focus was there. And it hasn't been but until the last couple of years that as I'm seeing, oh, actually, I've had all these other issues throughout my life. and never even thought that they could be related. And that's just been my journey in the last like year and a half of really trying to take notice and take stock of all of the recurring issues that I've had over the years, and kind of pausing to see, okay, when are these occurring? Why are these occurring? Is there any kind of pattern or theme when these occur? Like, is it triggered by something, or is it generally just, maybe this is just all related to EDS? And I'm honestly very excited to see a doctor and like talk to somebody about all of this, because I never have. I did when I dislocated my knees bad enough that I needed surgery. So I had surgeries done on both my knees. And again, even that doctor, I loved that doctor. He was wonderful. He was awesome. But in hindsight, I wish that he had asked more questions, because at that point, all that I knew and that my parents knew was, you just keep dislocating your body and we don't know why. You're just hypermobile. And so my surgeries ended up just kind of being, here's a Band-Aid to fix an issue, when now I'm like, I think this is a much bigger issue. And I just don't think he had the forethought of seeing, are there other things here? Because again, growing up, it was primarily my knees that dislocated. Other parts of me had issues, but main dislocations were just in my knees. And again, as I've gotten older, more things and other parts have dislocated. And I'm like, I think this is strange. And I think we need to go find more answers. But that in itself has been hard too. Just trying to, I'm somebody that feels bad when I have to go to the doctor. I think part
Why
of
do you
that
feel
is
bad when you have to go to the doctor?
growing up on the mission field, unless you were dying, you didn't go to the hospital. Part of that was just not having access to medical care, but also it was just really expensive. And if you did have a serious issue, you usually had to leave the country. And I have by far cost my family the most in medical expenses. And I am just somebody that's like, ooh, I'm like, I'm fine. Sure. My shoulder dislocated. I'm okay. Like I got it back in place. We're good. I don't need to go see anybody. And so I'm just like, I don't want to cost my parents money. I don't want to go. Because what if I'm like crazy and they're just going to say like, oh yeah, you're just hypermobile. And like, this is just what you have to deal with. And I'm like, I already know that I know that. And so why do I want to go spend hundreds of dollars to see a geneticist or whatever and talk to somebody? But deep down, I have always wanted to. I've always, especially in the last like 4 years, I've wanted to go to someone and be like, listen, I'm really thinking that I have this. Let's talk about it. And I am. So my doctor's appointment is in June. So,
oh my gosh, that's so exciting. So we'll have to do a follow-up episode afterwards, to see what happens.
Finally going to get some answers, which is nice. Because every day I'm learning new things. And like even the other day I was at the dentist and they were like, I've known that I've had jaw issues for a long time. And now I'm starting to think, could this be related? And also just kind of after we talked the other day, what are things that I could be doing now to just kind of help manage some of this chronic pain? What are things that I should be doing that I shouldn't be doing? Because again, I'm still reckless with my body. And I feel like that's the tension that I live in, and of wanting to care for my body and be cautious, but also recognizing I want to live as normally and as fully as I can. So sometimes I'm willing to, let's play volleyball. If I dislocate a shoulder, I'll be okay. But also like that's at some point, it's going to get to a point where that's probably not good for me. So would like to talk to somebody just to see like, what are things that I can keep doing? Maybe that I shouldn't, even just exercising. Like, are there things that I shouldn't be doing? And again, if all of these things are connected and interrelated, what can I be doing to manage some of those other things too?
Yeah, I think that's the really interesting thing about EDS is because even once you're diagnosed with EDS, everyone's symptoms looks a little bit different. Like you've primarily dealt with dislocations, right, in your knees. I've never officially had like a full dislocation. I've had like subluxations, but most of my issues were like the heart problems it was causing, which most people aren't aware that EDS can cause that. And so, like you said, you start realizing, oh, all these other symptoms I've just been putting Band-Aids on. These are actually symptoms of the same thing. And that's why it can be so hard for doctors to recognize that. Because if you see, oh, just somebody's having migraines, we'll just treat the migraines. Or someone's having stomach problems, which unfortunately goes along with EDS. But if they have that, we'll just give them some medication for that. Or if they're having heart problems, we'll just do a heart surgery or a knee surgery for knee problems. And eventually just builds and builds and builds until you're like, okay, there's got to be something causing all of this. Yeah. And so it's kind of a wild journey. And I think maybe that's why it takes so long for people to realize that something is wrong. Like they don't even know to bring it up to their doctors until there's been multiple surgeries or multiple different treatments. But for our listeners that don't know you, could you talk a little bit about your background? Because you mentioned you're on the mission field and kind of what that looked like, and maybe how that played into you not wanting to get diagnosed right away.
Yeah, well, I mean, I grew up as a missionary kid. So my parents were missionaries in Africa for like 20 years. So I grew up in the middle of East Africa, Ethiopia, middle of nowhere, grass, mud hut, very remote. And so medical care was a hard thing to come by. So when I'm trying to even think how old I was when I had my first dislocation, and I had to have been, I don't know, 8 or 9. And again, like we didn't have the access that we needed. And so we just focused on reading our own books and researching ourselves. And at that point, it was just like, oh yeah, we just think that you're hypermobile. And I can remember sitting down and like, I can like even dislocate my knees myself if I wanted to. Like I'm just so loose everywhere. But I was like, yeah, hypermobility, this seems like this is it. And then I remember, like I said, I was very active. I played volleyball. I did cross country for a season. I did track and sprinted and did hurdles. And I was doing hurdles and I dislocated it in the middle of a race hurdling. And it was probably one of the worst dislocations that I'd had since the first one had occurred. And we went and we did see a doctor for that one because I could not move afterwards, couldn't walk for a couple weeks. And they kind of said the same thing, like, yeah, we just think you're hypermobile. And so focused on doing PT. That was their suggestion. And again, like I didn't have like a physical therapist like you do in the US. Like they were like, here are some things you can try at home. So I did that for several years and saw no improvement. And so I really was like, okay, this isn't working. So maybe just the tendons around my knees aren't working properly. And I'm just going to be hypermobile forever. And we're just going to have to deal with it. And then when I was 17, I moved back to the US and I'd only been in the States for a couple months and dislocated it again. And all I did was turn around. So there are sometimes these have been triggered by, again, me being reckless or me being some kind of physical activity. And then this one, literally, all I did was turn around and I dislocated it as I turned and broke off cartilage, pulled several things. My knee was like 3 times the size that it should be. And
my gosh.
Finally went and saw a surgeon and like orthopedic surgeon here in the United States, which is the first time that I want to say that I saw like a real doctor. Not the Ethiopian doctors weren't real doctors, but like just different. Yeah, like he very much was just like, okay, yeah, like you've broken off cartilage and you have torn some tendons. And again, like they were just like, I think we should just do surgery to kind of help tighten your knees, and that will help them and keep them from dislocating, or at least dislocating fully. They'll still sublux sometimes, but the tendon or the cadaver that they put in there kind of keeps it from fully dislocating, which has been successful and like has helped. So like I am grateful for that. I think in the back of my brain, I still think, I remember that doctor saying like, you're probably going to have arthritis when you're like 40, if not sooner. And you're probably going to have like full knee replacements and other joint replacements when you're young. And I literally was just like, oh, okay.
Did he tell you that before the surgery or after the surgery?
Before.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, great. This is yes, it's a fix, but it still kind of feels like just a Band-Aid fix. So we'll see, I guess. That's why I'd like to know if it really is EDS, because what can I start doing now to maybe lessen those effects? Or again, like how should I be caring for my body? And I know I'm reckless, and I know there are times where I need to not do that. Like I was playing volleyball last week, and I don't even know if you can tell on the Zoom, but I was just going to hit a ball, and I just like, it's like all of me is just fragile and just breaks. And I just happened to hit the wrong place on my wrist and like popped, and it's like twice the size that it should be. And just even how much you bruise and just things are like, this can't be normal. Like, I don't see other people dealing with this. But at the same time, it's not, like you said, it's invisible. Unless you really know me and you happen to be there when one of these events occurs, you would have no idea. Which is why I think too, it's been easy to trick my mind to just think like, oh, this is just your normal and you just have to live your normal, which is true. But it would be nice to be able to have a name behind this too and recognize like there is an underlying thing here.
Well, and I think for you too, I think part of the reason why people assume that you don't have any of these issues is because you've been such a high achiever for so long, at least as long as I've known you. For context, all the listeners, Mallory was always like the top student in our class. And her senior year, she took an entire year of grad level classes while taking a full load of senior level classes and while working and doing all the fun stuff that Mallory does, serving in all sorts of different capacities. So I think part of that is, we just see you doing all these things and we assume, oh, she's just killing the game. Like, she's Mallory. None of us can be Mallory. Come on. So do you think...
You're in that boat too, just for the record.
I'm interviewing you, Mallory. Come on. But do you think that's, kind of played into maybe why you want to get diagnosed, is so you have that kind of like, okay, even though I'm able to do all these different things, I still do actually have this, even though I'm able to push through it?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think more than anything, just that validation for myself. And I don't know why that matters, but I think it just for me feels like I'm not crazy. I think for the last couple of years, I've just started saying like, yeah, I'm pretty confident that I have EDS. When I look at the Geiger scale and I do all the things, I'm like, yep, I'm checking all of these boxes, and I'm just waiting for the certified physician and geneticist to say, yep, this is what is wrong with you. But I think just like hearing that is going to be an emotional release of just being able to kind of let it go in a sense and just kind of fully accept like, yes, you've been able to push through and you've been able to find my own sense of normal in the midst of all of these things, which I'm grateful for. There have definitely been seasons where that has been very challenging to do. And it is easy to hide it, like you said. And there are very few people in my life that know that there are all these other things going on. And so one, I think it'll just be nice for my own self to feel validated in that. But then like how you have been doing, to be able to confidently say finally, like, yes, this is what I have and it is a part of my life. And here is kind of how it affects me. But I have been able to find my own sense of normal through it. And it means that sometimes I have to be kind to my body. And there are days where I was sitting and watching a musical the other day with a friend of mine. It was the theater, so we went to a show. And I was sitting there and I was like, why does all of my body hurt right now? And I like couldn't get comfortable. And my roommate was like, are you okay? And I was like, no, my body hurts. And she knew that I had some issues, but didn't know everything. And it was awesome just to be able to have that conversation with her and say, yeah, sometimes just even sitting for extended periods of time, it's just really uncomfortable because my joints start to stiffen and I need to be able to move them. And so to be able to like start bringing other people into this journey with me and be able to say again, like, yes, this is what I have and that's okay, but it does affect how I live. But I try to find, my own normal in that.
I think that's one of the best things you can do is to try, because whether or not you end up actually having EDS, which I mean, everything you're saying lines up perfectly with EDS, but regardless, say they're like, oh, no, nothing's wrong, which sometimes doctors say that even if you do have EDS, you're still having all the same symptoms. Whether or not you have the title of EDS, you're still experiencing that same pain when you're sitting for a long period of time. And so I think it's really important to have those conversations even without the diagnosis, because that's your experience is still valid. Your pain is still valid. Just because it's not labeled in a way that's obvious to others doesn't mean that it's not important to talk about or that it's something you're actually experiencing. Now, for me, I know it was a lot easier to talk about once I actually got diagnosed, even though, most people, once I explained everything I was going through before the diagnosis, they wouldn't really dismiss me, but it just made me feel so much better because I was able to say, look, there's this piece of paper that says something is wrong with my body. And that was just really helpful for me. And it sounds that's kind of what you're hoping for too.
Yeah. I think having somebody who occupies a space of authority that can say like, yes, there is something wrong with you, or at least your body's not functioning the way that it should be or the way that it was intended to work, will be a very needed validation, I guess. But I think the thing that I have to work on too is just one, welcoming people into that space and having those conversations, like you said. Definitely need to work on that, but also need to work on recognizing that sometimes it's okay to not do things or to ask for help, and realize that is okay. That is just the normal space that I am living in. And sometimes I need to say no to the volleyball game, or sometimes I need to ask help for this or that. And that is really, really hard for me to do because, as you said, I like to achieve and I like to do things to an excellence. And sometimes that pushing of one's capacity or pushing one's limits in that, I need to learn where that balance is of sometimes being able to say, no, I don't need to do that. And that's hard.
It's one of the hardest things to do. And I think sometimes with the diagnosis, it's a little bit easier because I'll be feeling like, if it's something that people can't see, if it's not a dislocation, if it's like the body aches or fatigue or chronic pain, do you experience those?
Yeah. And it was, I had this past Christmas was the first time that I like talked to it about with my sister-in-law. Like she knows that I dislocate things and like she's aware of that. But I think very casually offhand mentioned, I was like, oh, well, yeah, like I usually have to take like ibuprofen once a week because I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I just like can't sleep because my body aches. And I didn't realize that I had never said that to her before. But it was like all of a sudden this clicking for her where she was like, what? You have to do what? Like, that's how much like your body's hurting and it's causing you to like wake up in the middle of the night. And I was like, oh yeah, have I not mentioned that before? And it was really cool to see how she responded. And all of a sudden she was like, whoa, like she started seeing me, I think, in a different way, but at least in a way like, oh yeah, this is more than just like dislocating things. Like this is affecting your sleep. This is affecting your everyday life. It isn't just affecting you when you randomly dislocate something.
And do you feel like you realize that certain things aren't normal when you bring them up to other people? Because I know that I've brought things up and been like, oh yeah, I can fall asleep because I was aching so bad. And people are like, what? And I'm like, that doesn't happen to you regularly? Have you experienced that too?
Yes, for sure. Definitely all the like joint stiffness and pain. Like I talk about it with my friends who are in their 20s and they're like, what? Like, what is wrong with you? But then I talk about it with like, I hear people talk about it when they're like in their 60s and 50s. And I'm like, that's how I feel. And I'm like, whoa, oh no.
We're basically grandmas.
Literally, I joke about that all the time. Like, I feel like I'm a 20-year-old living in like a 60-year-old's body. I joke about that a lot and people think I'm joking. And I'm like, no. Like, I'm serious. Like, I'm serious.
Yeah.
I can sleep, even just being like physically tired. And I've noticed this over the last couple of years. Like, I am more physically tired than I ever was before. And yes, I'm still pretty active, but there are days where I'm like, I should not be this tired. Like, I have no reason to be this tired. And I'm like, it's okay. Just be kind to your body. Go take a nap. But yes, especially being young, being in my 20s and talking about it with other friends that are also in their 20s. And they just talk about their normal rhythms. And I'm like, yeah, no, my body doesn't do that. Or like, my body doesn't behave that way.
Like it's raining outside today and literally my left hip always throbs when it rains, like without fail.
No.
And my brother Sam, who also has EDS, he does the same thing with like, I think it's his right knee or something. He's like, oh, it's about to rain because it'll start throbbing. Yep. And to be fair, we all have the personality of grandparents, but we should not have the joints of grandparents.
we do have the personalities. Like every morning, like I wonder if it'll pop right now. It might not, but I was like, it's even just like there are certain rhythms when I wake up that I'm like, all right, I gotta pop this and I gotta pop this and I gotta move this, or like if I don't do that, I'll drastically feel it later in the day. And I'm like, man, I did not stretch or I did not move that, and now no good. Or I used to be a kids pastor, and so I played with kids all the time. I was on the floor a lot. I'm on the floor right now, which I'm very flexible and I enjoy being able to move. But there are days where I'm like, I've only been sitting crisscross applesauce for 10 minutes. And I'm like, whoa, I can't move.
Or like,
Yeah.
I used to always make fun of my grandma because she would always wake up like 2 or 3 hours before she needed to go somewhere in the morning. So like if she had to leave by 7, she'd be up at like 4 or 5 a.m. She was like, I just need to move slow in the mornings. I was like, Grandma, that's stupid. And now here I am in grad school at the ripe old age of 23, and I have to wake up 2 hours before classes. I'm like, I have to make sure to eat enough. I have to make sure to drink enough. I have to make sure to stretch. I have to make sure to move very slowly. I have to use my heating pad. I've got to use my ice pack. Like I've got to do all these different things just to be able to make it to class.
I feel that on such a deep level. And I think that's kind of what I'm excited to talk to somebody about, even if they're like, I don't know if this is fully EDS or whatever, but just to kind of ask them those questions of, and I know you and I have talked about this, but like, are there certain vitamins and supplements that I could be taking that could be helping? Or are there certain rhythms of, should I be using a heating pad more? Should I be doing this or that can just help? Because I think each year I'm feeling it more and more. And I'm like, let's just slow down this progression because again, we're 23 and I'm like, what is this going to be like in 5 years, 10 years? Or you and I have talked about like even just having kids, like, are my hips going to dislocate? Like these are fears that are in the back of my brain that I think are at least worth talking to someone and just voicing those.
Of course, yeah. And anytime I've brought up, my issues to someone who's older, I won't say old, but someone who's older, they're like, just wait, it only gets worse. I'm like, I know, that's what I'm worried about. Like if I'm at a 40-year-old's joint pain right now already, like I'm worried about how much worse it's going to get. And it's hard not to worry about those things. Doctors tell you not to stress about your health because that'll make it worse. But also like it's a stressful thing. And I don't really want to be a Debbie Downer, but I want to be honest. My geneticist was great in helping me get diagnosed. He diagnosed me pretty much instantly. He ran a bunch of different tests to check for like vascular EDS and other types of that. But he was pretty much like, yeah, you have EDS. Okay, bye. Schedule a follow-up if you want like 6 months. And me and my parents were just kind of like, but like, what do we do now? He was like, here's a pamphlet. And then he handed me a pamphlet and then like walked out the door. And I was just kind of like, I was relieved to have gotten a diagnosis. I was like, at least I know, I'm not crazy and it's not all in my head. But I also thought they were going to like provide me with some resources. And that honestly just didn't really come from him. Thankfully, I found a very good primary care doctor who, once he knew it was EDS, he started recommending me to like good physical therapists who worked specifically with EDS. He helped me find good supplements. He helped me figure out like a good workout routine, which I know you've been getting buff for a while now. So maybe you could share a little bit with us about how you've been working out. But yeah, I don't know if geneticists in general will do that. I know mine didn't really help me with that, but it might be different for you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm interested to see how to go. I have been in between doctors just from, graduating undergrad and establishing myself now. So my first appointment is just with my new primary care physician. And I'm excited to talk to her, one, to just like start establishing care with one person, because another thing that I think has been tricky in my journey has been, I didn't have really a primary care physician when I lived in Ethiopia. And whenever we would come back to the United States, I always saw somebody different. There was one person that kind of had some continuity with my life, but not really. And then when I moved back to the States, I had somebody that I saw for 1 year when I lived in Indiana, but then I went to college. And so I had 2 different people that I saw during college. And so I've never had anybody who has like sat down with me and has just listened to me share what my life's journey has been with doctors and with issues. And so I'm like, nobody knows like everything that's going on. So for me, even to expect somebody, I feel like, to understand that I'm having all these things and to even think about how they could be related, like I can't knock them for that because, again, none of my doctors have known kind of all the issues. So one, I'm just excited to establish some care with someone who I'm hoping will be kind and gracious and just be willing to like listen to me share everything that's going on. And then one of like happened to be doing research the other day on EDS specialists, geneticists, and one of the like top ones is here in Indianapolis. And so I'm going to be asking for a referral to see her. And I do hope that goes well. But yeah, I've never seen a geneticist, so I have no idea what to expect in that, but hopefully it will go well.
And it's definitely, once you get the diagnosis from a geneticist, it's a lot easier to go to primary care and be like, I have this. And then they're like, oh, okay, what symptoms do you have that go along with EDS? And then I think that's really where the relationship starts. It'd be hard for somebody to learn all about your entire life and all your symptoms in a 30-minute appointment. I see my primary care doctor once a month. I've done that for like 6 years now. But he, is
Yes,
very,
Sam.
we love Jim. Yes, he sees my whole family. He's great. But he knows all my symptoms now. But, that didn't come in one appointment. That came in, months and years of him seeing how my symptoms progressed. If I went to him and I was like, hey, I tried running and my body fell apart, which that happened a couple of weeks ago. I was like, I think I'm going to go for a run. And then I just collapsed for like 3 days. And he was like, Anna, why did you do that? I was like, I don't know. He's like, try doing the elliptical instead if you want to do some cardio. And so I think finding a good primary care is going to be the most helpful for learning how to manage your symptoms more than a geneticist would be.
Which again, I think it'll be helpful also once I just figure out where I'm landing now. And once I have a new job and I'm like established, because I've been putting off finding somebody in Nashville because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be staying here, if I'm going to be moving. And once I feel like I'm in a spot where I can build that relationship with someone, will be nice. Because like even still now, my eye doctor is in Columbus, Ohio. My dentist is in Lexington, Kentucky. Well, my orthodontist is in Lexington, Kentucky. My dentist is in Indianapolis. So that's just because of the weirdness of my life. But having one person in one spot that can see me for more than a year will just be nice.
Yeah. And I think the most important thing too is, not to find someone who knows everything about EDS, because no doctors can be able to know every single symptom of every single disease. Like there's no way. But the most important thing is if they just take you seriously. So if you say, hey, I get a ton of joint dislocations, they go, oh, what do those look like? Instead of going, no, you don't. You don't want a doctor who just goes, no, you're not dealing with that. You're just stressed. You're just anxious. Like, yeah, do some meditation. You'll be fine. So that's, I think, the most important thing to look for and will make the most difference, because if they're willing to listen to you and to actually take your symptoms seriously, then everything else will fall into place. But yeah, it can definitely take a little bit of time to get there.
It's even just weird. I don't know. Even as I'm talking to you about this and you asked me to be on this podcast, I literally was like, what? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine.
How do you feel now?
Every time I talk to you, I'm like, no, there's something wrong with me.
I don't know if I want you to feel that way.
Again, it's just that achiever in me that I'm like, no, I'm fine. I can do anything that anybody else can do. I'm just hopeful for some more answers this year.
And I'll definitely be praying about that and praying that, the geneticist will give you a clear answer or clear diagnosis, whatever that looks like. I would be stunned to my core if it's not EDS. But I mean, you've been managing all this stuff great. I mean, for so long without a diagnosis. Do you care to share a little bit about the things you have been doing that have helped? So you mentioned like the surgery for your knees helped, but I also know that you've been working out for a little while. And then obviously you've done great in school and all of that. So have there been some things that have helped you manage your symptoms while you're waiting for a diagnosis?
I should be doing more than I am. I'm just going to say that. The last 2 years have been pretty hard, especially this last year. And I think part of that was compounded by moving and being in a new place and establishing new rhythms and being thrown off. Because at least in college, like I had 4 years to kind of establish some rhythms. But this last year has been not that way.
And what have you been doing over the past year?
I have been living in Nashville, working as a kids pastor. And that just ended. And so now I've actually been just resting. Like the past 4 months has been just a lot of rest, a lot of sleep. This past year, I think sleep has been like one of my highest priorities in just trying to establish healthy rhythms and getting enough sleep so that I'm physically able to do the things that I want to in the day. A lot of walking. I found walking really successful. Like I said, I used to run and I don't like doing that anymore. There are still days where I'm like, I really want to go for a run. And I'm like, no, you don't. You're lying to yourself. And I think after having my knee surgeries is really when I was like, I don't think I want to run anymore, just because that's a very high impact, especially on your knees. And just after the knee surgeries, I just was like, no. So I'm a big walker. So I do a lot of walking. There's still a limit where you didn't want to overdo it. Back in June, I went hiking in Spain for 3 weeks, which was a lot of fun. But it was like walking like 10 to 13 miles a day. And I was a little nervous because I was like, okay, this is going to be the most like I've ever walked in, or at least doing it every day. And that was good. Definitely felt that was hard. There were some days where I was like, I don't think I can walk anymore. But I found walking very successful. I have found just living very routinely and structured. So like going to bed at the right same time, getting up at the same time. I try to work out usually like 5 days a week, and it's usually in the mornings. I find that most successful for me. I think part of it is because it's cooler. When it's really hot, I don't like working out. And so I focus a lot for me on strength training rather than like cardio and things. And I think part of that is just because I recognize my joints are just very loose. So I do a lot of low impact strength training. So just a lot of things, I guess, that are with weights.
Was that something you were
weights.
able to start pretty easily, or is that something you had to ease into?
I would say ease into. Part of that was I was just still getting used to working out with having post knee surgeries. And so that just took a lot of time getting back up to where I felt confident in my knees. And there are still times where I'm like, I don't know if I can do that because I'm scared of what could happen. And I think because I've dislocated my knees so many times, there is a fear in me like, I don't want to do that move. Or I don't want to do that exercise because I'm afraid it'll give out or it will dislocate. For my shoulder, it's kind of like once I got my knee surgeries, it was like my knee stopped having issues and then my shoulder started dislocating.
Was your shoulder the one that you dislocated in your sleep?
Yes. And then I dislocated it playing volleyball as well. Again, I was not reckless in that one though. It was weird how that one happened. But since those have started happening, I've had to very much pull back on what I can do weight training wise on just arms and shoulders. Like I cannot do, what is it, like tricep extensions?
Oh no.
Because like I remember trying it once and I literally was like, and I will dislocate my shoulder if I keep doing this. So like I've learned that there are some things that like, nope, you cannot do that. That is a no-go. And for me, that's just been trial and error because I don't see a regular physical therapist. For me, I feel like it's been a lot of trial and error. A lot of ibuprofen, especially when like chronic pain hits. I do a lot of heating pad. For me, I think it's especially in the evening. I think it's just because like I've been active in the day or whatever I've done in the evenings. It's like all of a sudden my body's like, wow, you are carrying all of this tension and you need to release it. I've noticed too, like if I sit too long, so I just try to be mindful about getting up and like, even if I just need to walk around for like 2 minutes, especially I think with doing school, I find that I do a lot of sitting and just kind of forcing myself to get up and move around. Other things that I've done to manage it. Those are the main things right now.
Do you have any tips because I know you're in grad school now, right? You're doing your MDiv. So has there been anything that's helped you specifically with school? Because obviously you graduated very high from Milligan and you've been a very accomplished student for a long time. So is there anything separate from those things that have helped you specifically with school?
I think just being gracious to myself and really listening to my body. And sometimes that means sacrificing other things to allow myself to rest. Honestly, I think the biggest thing that got me through college was like I did prioritize rest. And I'm not a night person. And so like I had to learn when did my body function best, and my body functions best in the morning. So usually I try to do all of my school or any kind of schoolwork that I have in the mornings because in the afternoons I usually take a nap nearly every afternoon. And so just kind of learning the rhythms that my body needs. And for me, it's a lot of sleep. And again, like trying to live somewhat rhythmically and structurally. So I kind of know, oh, if I throw something off the rhythm, what does that mean for tomorrow? Like in living in Asheville, I do play a lot of volleyball, and having to like balance that with school has been interesting. And like there are some days I'm like, no, you can't play today because you do need to get this paper done. And you know you need to write it tomorrow morning. So you're not going to play today. But then there are other days where I'm like, you know what? Hoop school. Go play volleyball. um, for me too, I think finding other people that understand, and you've been a huge like comfort in that, and knowing that there's somebody else who gets it, and I can call you and be like, oh, this sucks. Or find people that like again like you that have other ideas and been successful in trying other things. This year has been a lot of inviting my family into that space more so than ever, and that's been helpful too, and just having someone to like soundboard off of and just vent what's going on in my body. Yeah, I think for me, I haven't seen as many academic challenges with EDS. For me, it's been more just physically starting to see that things that I want to do, I can't do anymore, or I need to change or modify, which is hard. Thankfully, like professors have been gracious. I did mention, like I do get migraines from, is it connected to EDS? Maybe, but that give me a lot of like dizziness and vertigo. Like usually if I have one, like it'll be like a week long event. And that is sometimes tricky with school. That's probably been the hardest thing for me in school is when I get one of those or an episode of that comes on. Because it is nearly impossible to read, write, and do anything. I haven't had that happen in grad school so far. I did have that happen in undergrad and just had to, email professors, and basically it was just like, hey, I'm having vertigo. I can't finish this, or I'll submit it later. And I have found normally always that my professors have been very gracious and have worked with me in that. I found grad school professors to be more gracious than undergrad. And because I started taking grad school in undergrad, I was able to kind of see both those really closely related. And maybe it's just because grad school professors just expect you to be doing your stuff. Whereas I think undergrad professors feel like they have to be on their students constantly. And I mean, people like you and me who are high achieving, who like we care, we're doing our stuff, we're not being lazy, we're not procrastinating. Like our reasons for needing extensions or our reasons for needing some assistance are usually valid. And
they're pretty rare.
And I find too, like just when you show that you're responsible and you show that you're caring and you're not there to waste your time or your professor's time, like they are very considerate. Especially when those kind of things pop up.
Yeah. And I think all those things kind of tie in together is, having a good community and bringing people into that space, to use what you said. It's possible to do all this on your own, but it's a lot harder. And it's probably going to lead you to be burnt out a lot faster. And so, like you said, I think depending on your family in a lot of ways can be really helpful, or at least just bringing them into it and talking to them about it. It was very helpful for me to have friends like you in school too. And I know we would sometimes, there was a time where I was out of school for like 2 weeks before a final and you just gave me your study guide. And it honestly was a lifesaver. I was like, I don't have the energy to go through all my notes and figure all this out. Or we'd have study sessions together and that would just make stuff so much easier. And we'd complain about our joints for 10 minutes because we're old people and be like, what's hurting you today? And you're like, my knees. I was like, my hips.
Man, always them knees. Yeah, it's been interesting too. Like my both of my brothers have had some like knee issues themselves, and especially my younger brother. He's also very hypermobile. Seeing him have any other issues, and he's never him and my older brother I think has like this subluxed his knee once. He's also very active, but it's made me even start wondering too, like where in the family is this, and could they have parts of EDS or EDS themselves? Or it's just interesting because I mean I know you and Sam both have it and your mom has it too. It's fascinating.
Well, I was thinking about that when you said that your parents were like, oh, it's just growing pains, which to someone who's not familiar with that, it might come across as dismissive. But normally with people who have EDS, it comes from one of their parents because it's genetic. And so my mom was like, oh yeah, it's growing pains. She was like, me and my brothers, we'd be crying in pain for like 10 years while we were growing up because of growing pains. And we all just thought that was normal. Like everyone in our family experienced those growing pains. And so we just didn't think anything of it. So I remember my brother was just like pretty much dying from these growing pains and couldn't sleep for like years, especially since he's so tall too. I think that just made it worse. I didn't have that issue as I'm also, short. I'm 5'2" and you're 5 foot. Or 4'11". We'll say 5 foot for the podcast.
5 foot. I like 5 feet.
I'll edit out the 4'11". It'll just be 5 foot. But they were still incredibly painful, and I wasn't growing anymore. And so I think, when you're dealing with something like a genetic disorder like EDS, it's really easy for family members to not see symptoms as symptoms because they've had them their whole life too. And doctors told them that it was normal. So they think it's normal. And so you grow up thinking it's normal. And that cycle kind of continues until you're like, wait a second, this lines up with what my friend Anna talks about, and she has EDS. And so it's that kind of a process.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah. There have been days where like I've been up, said goodbye to my roommates who went to work. They return at 5 p.m. and I'm like in the same position in bed, in the same clothes. And I'm like, hi, I promise that I've been somewhat productive, but hello.
Literally me every time Megan comes home, because I'll literally be sitting in the same spot on the couch because I've got like my heating pad set up there. Got a little spot for my hot tea. It's just like the routine. The routine helps. Being in comfy clothes and using the heating pad at the same points, like it helps.
And I feel like I have to validate and be like, no, I promise I did things today. I didn't sit here all day, but like I did things. Yeah, it's just weird. I'm telling you, the things that I'm learning, even just in like bruising and scars and just what those look like. Just, it's wild.
The bruising one really threw me. Yeah.
Talk to me more about like your heart issues. Because like the only heart issues I've had, they actually like started occurring like after my knee surgeries and just like having a really high heart rate. And
really?
Yeah, like after my like rest, I can be sitting and doing nothing, and all of a sudden my heart rate will be like 110, and it's like I'm doing nothing. And like
That's
after after my surgeries, my like resting heart rate was like 140, and like they kept me in the hospital until it would like come down a little bit. They finally discharged me at like 125 or whatever. And so every once in a while I'll just like randomly spike like a high heart rate or even like weird fevers. And I'm always just like, so many questions. So many questions.
Yeah. So I don't know. Here's the problem is, my family went to Ecuador and we ended up getting that weird bacteria that like infected all of us. We were super sick for like 5 years. And that's what caused all of my EDS issues to flare up, because I never really had, like I had the growing pains and some joint pain, but it was never bad enough for me to be like worried about it. But I ended up in the hospital at 15 because I had a lot of regular heartbeats and my heart was beating very fast. And so I know it's something that goes along with EDS. I'm not sure if in my situation it was caused by EDS, but I do know that a lot of people will experience PVCs. They're called premature ventricular contractions. So your heart's kind of like double beating every time, which means your body's not getting enough blood, which leads to a whole host of issues. The way they found that out for me was by doing a tilt test. And that's also what diagnosed me with POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And that is a huge invisible illness that goes EDS. They don't know what causes it, but pretty much every woman I know that has EDS gets diagnosed with POTS at some point. But it leads to, a high heart rate when you're sitting down. That. It can lead to, I'm sorry, you asked me.
I know.
But it's, it'll lead to a high heart rate when you're sitting down. When you change positions, it can cause your heart rate to like really spike. It can cause blood pressure issues, dizziness, things like nausea, passing out, stuff like that. Is that ticking a lot of boxes for you, Mallory?
Maybe. The high heart rate for sure. The dizziness, especially like with standing, nausea. My nausea has always been more, again, like rooted in those migraines that I get, which I very rarely get an actual headache from. I primarily get visual issues, auditory issues, which I will hear things that are not there. And then I will get super dizzy, and then I'm just nauseous. And the only way for like that spell to end is usually if I throw up. And then usually if I have one, I have a couple others in that week. So yes, again, I just am like, I feel like I have so many weird things. And so if these are all related, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, I think maybe like EDS and POTS are kind of like the same thing, or like something else is causing them together. I don't know. So I actually developed POTS after I got COVID. So diagnosed with EDS for 3 years at that point. And then I got COVID, and then it basically never went away. So I got post-COVID syndrome. And then that's really when the heart rate, like different heart rate stuff started coming up. That was different from what I previously had. And so that was the POTS. I think the first time that was probably EDS or the weird Ecuador virus. But yeah, definitely the second time they diagnosed me with POTS.
Thank you, Ecuador.
Mission trip, woo. Still worth it. Still would go again. But
I think that's been a fear of mine, is like, contemplate taking this new job, because it will require me to be traveling all the time and out of the country, like probably 10 times in a year. And yeah, I don't know. I just have, again, questions of like, okay, how do I manage this, especially if I'm traveling so much? And I don't know, just so many questions. So many.
I think, honestly, the easiest thing to do is to try and get a diagnosis with EDS, because if it's a genetic thing, something that's going to go away, it's something they can easily test for. And so once you have that one diagnosis, it is so much easier to get tests done, to have doctors believe you, to have them make referrals to specialists, because instead of going, oh, this, young 20-year-old girl is having some issues, they go, this young woman has Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, and she's having these other issues pop up too. And generally they're familiar with things like POTS going along with it.
Now, it's my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, the, HEDS is the only one that doesn't have a genetic marker to it, though. And that's the EDS that I think that I have. When I have researched the others, I don't think that I have any of those. And so, they're basing it off the Kuiper scale and other things. But like with that, is it just passing, those tests that, like they've created, since there's not a genetic test that goes along with that?
He did, the scale and all that different stuff. And he was like, it's clear you have some kind of EDS. He's like, the only one they officially tested me for was the vascular, because I had an uncle who had like the aortic dissection, I think it's called, and that goes along with that. And so they're worried that that was what I had. So they tested me for that one just to roll it out. And once they rolled it out, they were like, okay, you have EDS. It's probably type 3, which is hypermobility. So I got the overarching diagnosis of EDS, but they didn't do a specific test for hypermobility. They just rolled out the other one. So hypermobility EDS, not just hypermobility. It's nice and complicated and all that fun stuff, but it really is so much easier once you get a diagnosis. And this is the approach I now have in life, is if I'm going to get injured, rolling over in bed the wrong way, why not go to a foreign country,
Sure,
like if I'm going to get injured either way, I mean, don't be stupid. Don't be like cliff diving, because that's just not going to go well.
That is me, and that's where I need to
don't go cliff diving,
because I won't go cliff diving, but I'm not an adrenaline junkie by any means. Like I'm a safe person. Like there are things, I have rules, okay, but there are certain things where I'm like, yeah, I'll do that with my body. I'll play ultimate frisbee and fling myself on the ground to catch the frisbee. And there are just moments where I'm like, what are you doing? Stop it.
Yeah, I think it's just like that balance we were talking about before. It's like you kind of have two options. You can either, do nothing and just spend all of your life in bed, but honestly, that's just gonna make you feel worse anyways, and you might dislocate a shoulder by rolling over. You never know. Or you can be crazy and just do everything, without any fear, and just end up injuring yourself and putting yourself in the hospital. Or you can kind of just do both, figure out what matters to you. If I've got a paper to write, I probably shouldn't go cliff diving. But, if it's the summer and I have time to recover afterwards and it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, like, go for it. You don't want to spend your life just in fear that something might happen. That kept me from working out for a really long time, because I was like, oh, what if I work out and I dislocate something? And I was like, well, I'm probably more likely to dislocate something if I never work out, because I'm losing all the strength that I had. And so you kind of have to decide for yourself, like, and you've clearly already been doing that. It's like, what is most important? And how do I make decisions according to that and being balanced along the way?
And I think, I wonder if I'm a little bit more careless too, because I've never been put in the hospital for this. I mean, other than having surgeries, which that was my own choice. Thankfully, every other time that I've injured myself, I've been able to, relocate the joint, or it subluxes and it goes back in itself. And there is this like fear in the back of my mind. I'm like, at what point is this going to put me in the hospital? Which again, you can't live that way. And I don't want to, which is why I think, especially right now, while I am as young as I am, I'm like, we can be a little more reckless.
Yeah, because I think when I was first diagnosed, I was very much that way. I was like, oh, I can't do anything. Like, I don't think I'll be able to go to college. I don't think I'll be able to do, anything aside from just like stay at home. I don't know. But that honestly just kind of made me miserable. And I would much rather be able to try and do things, to attempt, to work out, to go to grad school, to compete at Miss Tennessee, whatever, and risk that not working out than, having just never tried. I think that's true.
I'm so glad you're trying. You're doing great things. And I love getting to watch you do school, which you love and you love learning. And I love getting to see you do Miss Tennessee again. And I love getting to see you do this and get to advocate and, make invisible illnesses available, and that people can kind of, not you make them available, but you, you help people realize that they're there. And I hope you're doing great. And I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you.
I really appreciate that.
You can cry because, oh my goodness, you're doing really, 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 really good.
Thank you. Well, that really helps to hear because, I still have a lot of days where, it's hard to get out of bed and, my joints in my body hurt. And it feels like, oh man, all these other people don't have these issues and they're able to do all these different things. And so it's easy to feel like I have to push through that. So it's really encouraging to hear somebody say that to me. And that's very helpful. Well, I'm glad we can feature you on the podcast, even though, it's not as fun as like in-person speaking. You still get to speak to a lot of people. Is there anything else that you'd want to say about everything you've been through to maybe encourage someone else dealing with the same kind of issues?
Yeah, I think just like, don't be afraid to trust yourself. Because I think there are still moments where I waver and I'm like, no, you're fine. You're not as in much pain as you think you are. Or your pain it's really easy for me to compare my pain to other people that have EDS. And like you said, like there are so many different types and everybody's presents so differently. And having to remind myself, like, you do have problems. It may not be the severity as other people, but just that's not a reason to not seek help. And so I think it's taken quite some time for me to really recognize your pain is valid and it is real and it is okay to seek help for that.
I think we all need to hear that. And I think that'll be really helpful to a lot of people. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to leave a rating or subscribe for future episodes. It's a small action, but it really does help to spread the word about invisible illnesses. Also, if you want to stay up to date on all things Unseen But Believed, go follow me over on Instagram and TikTok at Unseen But Believed. And remember, just because invisible illnesses are unseen, they should be believed.